Today, we're going to be talking about the Handbook of Hate Memes, which is a PDF file that was created by the European Observatory of Online Hate. The EOOH is a project funded by the European Union, and it's basically a consortium of 4 different organizations. The main member is a company called TextGain. They say what they do is develop AI that helps address societal problems such as hate and discrimination. The second organization listed is Dare to be Gray. It's an organization that claims to be in support of nuanced gray zone thinking versus black and white thinking. I was actually totally on board until I visited their website and read the following quote. They say, "Some might say that regulating free speech online is an infringement on freedom of expression. However," and yeah, I stopped reading there because it's an anti-free speech organization. Up next is PDCS, which is a Slovakian NGO that provides, quote, professional training and facilitation services, consultancy and advisory services in areas of conflict resolution. Last up is HU, University of Applied Sciences in Utrecht. It's a university in the Netherlands. Now that we have a better idea of who wrote the handbook, let's go back to that. The Handbook of Hate Memes was originally released via Twitter. However, the original tweet has since been taken down, apparently due to poor reception. Unfortunately for the EOOH, you can't really delete anything from the internet, and I managed to get a copy. So why didn't people like the Handbook of Hate Memes? Well, the most common issue appears to be that the analysis contained in it just wasn't very good. It seems like the people who made the handbook tried to take a very scholarly and professional tone while actually understanding very little about the subject that they were covering. However, I think the problems with the handbook actually run quite a bit deeper than just the lack of understanding showed by the authors. Besides being low quality and just highly subjective in general, it is extremely misleading in certain places, as I'll show you later in the video. My main criticism of the handbook would be that it paints things in an extremely wide brush. They do a lot of trying to create guilt by association. And I don't think this is necessarily an accident. I think that's actually the intended purpose of this, is to contextualize certain memes or certain communities by creating a false association between things that I would say actually do qualify as hate memes and showing them alongside much more innocent, non-hateful memes. So the handbook is broken up basically into 2 parts. We're going to go over the first part here, which is basically an introduction and a write-up about what exactly the handbook is supposed to be. What I'm going to do is parse through some of these sections and highlight why I think it wasn't received very well, highlight why I think it's not a very accurate or well-written document, and then point out a few places where I think they're just being very misleading in general. So here we get to section 2, labeled "What are hate memes?" And here you see kind of the problem with things like proposing hate speech laws is the term hate here is very general. What they say is hate memes typically feature specific targets such as refugees, people of color in developing countries, people with disabilities, poor people, gay people, and then just comparisons. Like, it's just a very general thing. It's not specifically designed enough to be enforced in any meaningful way, at least in my opinion. This section also contains kind of an interesting claim. One of the things they deem to be hate speech is, quote, images that promote the beauty and or supremacy of a local culture or nationality. So if you ignore the and supremacy clause in that claim, what they're essentially saying is that promoting beauty of like a culture or a nationality is somehow a bad thing. Logically, this doesn't make sense to me, because if you're promoting the beauty in something that's a purely positive claim, it's not really something you can put in a negative light. But they're putting it alongside, the and supremacy clause, creating sort of a like false association, as if some kind of supremacist view is the only way to promote the beauty of the culture, which it's not. And in section 3, we come to an example of information that's being presented in a very one-sided manner. They refer to the insult libtard as something that's used by far-right extremists, which it is, but it's also used by the far left as well. Even like a moderate conservative would call someone they consider liberal to be a libtard. Basically, anyone who isn't liberal is going to call them a libtard if they're trying to insult them. So why present it as an exclusively right-wing thing? It's something that, at the very least, both extremes do. I think this serves as an example of where they're lumping everyone into like an overly broad category. In this case, it appears to be anyone who isn't enthusiastic about the globalist, corporatist status quo is basically getting put into a bucket here. So like if Normie reads the handbook, then goes on YouTube and they see Jimmy Dore going around calling people libtards, they're going to go, oh, this Jimmy Dore guy is a far-right extremist, I'm not going to listen to him. Meanwhile, Jimmy Dore is someone who frequently criticizes Bernie Sanders and AOC from the left. Now, for a bit of clarification, going forward, I'm going to be focusing a lot on the website 4chan. For those of you who don't know, 4chan is a message board that allows users to post anonymously on a wide variety of subjects. Anyone can use it without creating an account, and users are basically unable to identify one another. 4chan is frequently the subject of media outrage due to its loose moderation policies and general adherence to free speech. While the handbook lists a few websites that they call hate meme factories, 4chan is by far the most popular one listed. Most of the fourth section is just a bunch of claims the authors make without any real justification. They don't really cite any studies, they're just giving you their opinion here. Something of note in the third paragraph is with the creative use of bolding, you can kind of see that their main claim is that people make hate memes for admiration. Now, in the context of 4chan, this makes no sense because it's an anonymous image board, so you're never really going to get credit for a successful meme you make there. Honestly, I would make the claim that trying to make memes for clout is more of a leftist tendency, and that's something I'll get into later in the video. So in the beginning of section 5 here, they start to go off the rails when it comes to just mixing in completely ridiculous beliefs with things that aren't so ridiculous. The first example would be greedy Jewish bankers with space lasers will steal your money. Okay, if you remove the greedy Jewish in the space lasers part, what you're left with is bankers will steal your money, which doesn't seem like hate speech or even that ridiculous of a claim. Another kind of ridiculous claim they make is evil Ukrainian Nazis are secretly building nukes to destroy their own population. And so the Azov battalion exists. I'm admittedly not super well read on them. I don't think they call themselves Nazis. However, they do appear to be sort of a like European supremacist group within the Ukrainian military. So the nukes part is a little bit ridiculous, but the Ukrainian Nazis is not that ridiculous of a claim. They've used Nazi symbols in the past, including the what's called the Black Sun. They're certainly closer to being Nazis than a lot of groups that get falsely compared to Nazis. And so these are two examples where they're taking some truthful idea and mixing it in with ridiculous details to try and basically discredit the truthful portion of the claim. The authors then go on to conclude that this highlights the need for, quote, more media literacy and digital resilience education in schools. So what's happening in Section 5 is they've basically created a bunch of red herrings, and now they conveniently have a solution. They've created a problem, and now they're going to, sell you the way to fix that problem. So Chapter 6 is called Why Should I Care? And I think it contains a pretty major contradiction. This section reads that social control theory proposes that the best way to ensure peace and quiet is to include everyone. Now, this sounds like a pretty solid theory. The problem is that the EU has been doing the opposite. With overly broad hate speech laws, they're actually taking people out of the conversation. They're trying to keep people from being included. So if this is really how they feel, then their approach so far is to try and make things worse. According to them, the problem is that people are disenfranchised, and their proposed solution is to disenfranchise them even more rather than trying to bring them back into the fold. This theme carries on to the next section, Section 7, titled What Can I Do? At one point, they tell you never to engage with, quote, the trolls. They say that the trolls are better organized and more experienced, so don't even bother having a conversation with anyone who shares a forbidden meme. Don't risk communicating with them when we can't contextualize what's being said. There's even some fear-mongering at the end of the paragraph where they say, who knows what list you'll end up on? As if anonymous users on 4chan are being put on any lists other than the ones being made by governments, maybe. It's kind of telling they can't really name a list you'll end up on. Like some anonymous 4chan user is going around putting other anonymous users on a list somehow. It doesn't really make sense. The fact that governments like the EU are really the only ones capable of making a list like that in the first place makes this almost feel like a vague threat, right? Like, don't talk to the evil hate meme trolls, or who knows what list you might end up on. Now we're going to skip ahead to Section 11, where I think things get really interesting in terms of the way they're trying to tint the data they're presenting. This section points out that they selected around 600 memes and then created a bunch of tags to classify the different types of hate memes. And you see an interesting trend when you look at how some of the tags are applied. So the first tag is ridicule. It's defined as making fun of people. Then you have shitpost, which is making fun of people cruelly. Ignoring that this isn't at all what shitposting actually means, what exactly is the distinction between these two tags? Like, what is the difference between making fun of someone and making fun of someone cruelly? This distinction caught my interest right away, so I went to look for any trends between what they consider cruel and what is apparently not cruel. The pattern you'll see if you look into how the tags are used is basically that if you're making fun of Bernie Sanders or you're making fun of Trump, so basically populist candidates seem to be kind of the common factor there, then that's just considered to be ridicule. That's not cruel. If you're making fun of anyone else in the memes they listed, then that is shit posting. So that's to me a weird distinction to make. I'm not sure why it's not considered cruel to make fun of Bernie Sanders, but it's okay to make fun of anyone else who also isn't Trump. Another goofy sort of word game that they're playing is that they define the racism tag as discrimination based on looks. I would have thought that racism was discrimination based on race. So does that mean if you call someone four eyes, does that mean you're being racist because you're discriminating based on looks? Or I guess that's ableist, isn't it? Now that I think of it, there's no tag for ableism. Do this for me, EU. Add the ableism tag and allow me to report Europeans for hate speech if they make fun of my defective eyes. Then, of course, they have a tag for fascism, which they describe as, quote, white supremacy and neo-Nazism, which is not at all what fascism means. Fascism is more like when you have a government like the EU working with corporations and NGOs to put out propaganda manuals. It's when you have public-private partnerships planning your economy. The EU is, by definition, more fascist than the description that they've provided. I'd argue that now that the Handbook of Hate Memes is a meme itself, it should get the fascism tag. Section 14 is probably my favorite section, if for no other reason than the fact that the name is Why the Left Can't Meme. I would argue that it's because the modern left tends to lean authoritarian, and there's no room for humor when you're an authoritarian. They have a slightly different take. Their claim is that left-leaning people are more likely to see things as a gray area, whereas people on the right are more likely to think in terms of black and white. In my anecdotal experience, this really isn't the case. It's more like people closer to the center tend to be more open to ambiguity and nuance, whereas the farther you go out into the political extremes, be it left or right, it's at that point that someone's worldview kind of becomes more rigid, more black and white. Lack of nuance, in my opinion, stems from how extreme your beliefs are, not the general principles that underlie those beliefs. They also start huffing copium by claiming that left-wing memes are too politically correct and that they come across as boring. It's not that they come across as boring so much as that they really are just boring. The typical left-wing meme, at least as far as I've experienced, are usually very masturbatory. They generally set out to signal some kind of virtue in one way or another. The authors actually even touch on this point by claiming that right-wing spaces tend to make more variations on the same meme, that they're more competitive. There's more people working on the same meme trying to create the next permutation of it. And they go on to say that that dynamic is less prevalent in left-wing circles because there, everyone wants to make their own meme that they can personally take credit for. This difference highlights what I was saying earlier when I claimed that the authors didn't really understand the motivation behind creating what they deemed to be hate memes. Earlier, they claimed it was for clout, but here they admit that the right, which they're sort of slyly implying are the ones making hate memes, they're claiming they have a less egotistical way of creating memes. And this contradicts their earlier claim that clout and recognition are why these memes are created. Now, here is where the European Observatory of Online Hate has gone and jumped the shark. They just go into ridiculous territory from which they can't really regain their credibility. Here they claim that, quote, unlike Reddit, which hosts diverse political viewpoints in its channels, 4chan can be seen as a far-right echo chamber. To anyone who's familiar with both of these sites, it would seem almost like they made a typo and switched the two websites around. Their claim here is a complete inversion of the truth, and I'll explain how by highlighting how each of the two sites works. So in Reddit, there's an upvote system where you can upvote other people's posts. Posts with higher scores go to the top where they're more visible, while less popular posts go down to the bottom. This is a great way to create an echo chamber because opinions that are already popular with the in-group are going to get vastly signal boosted, while unpopular ideas that challenge any kind of status quo thinking are going to get relegated down to the bottom where nobody's going to see that. On top of that, Reddit has sort of a pay-to-win system. You can pay to get what are called Reddit awards, which you can give away to other posts. This serves as another means to make popular opinions stand out. And like I said, it's kind of a pay-to-win system, right? If you have deep pockets, you can hand out a bunch of these rewards and basically boost how popular a post looks if you want to boost someone who agrees with you. So Reddit is just set up to be very easily made into an echo chamber. On top of that, Reddit has a central moderation team which all subreddits have to answer to. This in turn creates a monoculture that gets unilaterally enforced, or in other words, it creates an echo chamber. Compare this to 4chan, which has no version of the upvote system. Posts are simply displayed in the order that they're made in any given thread. The result is that your post is displayed equally, no matter how popular or unpopular it is with any kind of majority or in-group that's present. There's no priority to opinions that 4chan may already like versus ones the users don't like. Another difference is that 4chan is a much more anonymous ecosystem. On Reddit, you have to at least sign up with an email and you got to set up a username, and this provides information that other users can potentially use to identify you. 4chan, on the other hand, can be used anonymously so that other users can't really possibly identify you in any way. This is beneficial because it eliminates any kind of chilling effect created by the ever-growing fear of being canceled for saying something unpopular. You're more likely to be open and honest about how you feel if you're able to do so in an anonymous setting. The third point I'd make here is that 4chan is clearly less of an echo chamber in terms of moderation. At 4chan, moderation is much more relaxed. As long as you're not posting something off topic or something illegal, then your post isn't going to get deleted. So as far as I can tell, their claim about Reddit not being an echo chamber and 4chan being an echo chamber seems pretty hard to justify. I admit there could be something I'm missing here. So if anyone disagrees with me, feel free to put something in the comment section. But as far as I can tell, their analysis here is very poor. Whether that's intentional or they just really didn't understand the websites they're dealing with, I'm not going to try to ascribe, which it is. And then towards the end of this section, you really start to see the mask slip off a little bit here. They say that unmoderated and anonymous here in bold, forums like 4chan are the linchpin in the effective organizational structure of far-right internet users. It's clear that this anonymity is what they don't like. They want to go out of their way to highlight it here, that it's the anonymous speech that they want to get rid of. The question becomes, why do they want to get rid of anonymous speech? They argue that it's because this is conducive to hate speech, but I would argue that it's more about the fact that creating effective propaganda from their end is harder when there's anonymous speech on the internet. Traditionally, propaganda has been the domain of the state. In order to put out effective propaganda through mass media, you basically had to be the state. You had to be the ones who control society. That way, no one else can really outcompete you. Any single actor who tries to put out counter-propaganda won't be able to afford to compete with the state. The state can simply outspend them and drown out subversive propaganda with their own. You can also put out more effective propaganda when you're able to conduct high-quality research on propaganda itself. Large organizations such as governments are able to do research on things like psychology and sociology in the context of propaganda to figure out what's most effective. Smaller actors generally aren't able to do that. Historically, this has been the case, but the internet has sort of shaken this trend up. It represents a shift in propaganda where things have become sort of more democratic. It's cheaper to put out propaganda through the internet. In the past, if you wanted to be a propagandist, you had to go through radio or TV, which quickly became expensive. Now you can make propaganda in the form of memes and it costs you nothing but your time. And if you're an organization like the EU, this isn't exactly a comfortable place to be. We're in an unprecedented situation where the powers that be have to worry about its own citizens putting out propaganda that's potentially more effective than their own. Propaganda used to be a duopoly shared by governments and large multinational corporations. Now decentralized groups on Mongolian basket weaving forums are capable of putting out propaganda that's able to challenge the mainstream narrative. This hasn't happened in any prior civilization that I'm aware of, and so it's a new problem that governments today are facing. And I think publications like the one we're looking at right now appear to be part of their answer to that. So, for anyone who's still watching, I wanted to thank you for your patience. This is my first full-length video, and it is running a bit longer than I thought it would. There still is a second half to the handbook I could go over. This basically lists examples of memes, explanations of the memes. It includes kind of the tags I went over earlier. I think there's a lot we could look at there. I'm not sure if there's anyone out there even interested in that kind of thing. If so, let me know by hitting the like button or leaving a comment. Otherwise, I have a few other topics I was thinking about exploring, so if no one's really interested in the Handbook of Hate Memes, I'm going to move on to something else.